Good morning, Senator, and happy Valentine's Day for everyone that celebrates. I know that we have a topic that we're going to go into, domestic topic, but I know that we wanted to quickly brush on the situation that's happening in Iran and the surrounding countries that harbor that region. So I'm going to pass it to you, Senator, so you can give us a brief update, and then we'll pivot to some of our domestic events that are happening.
Okay, well, Morgan and I have tried to keep you updated on what's going on with Iran. And I wish that I had better news, but it's my assessment that the United States will attack Iran and that it will occur fairly quickly, and somewhere within the next 2 weeks, more likely earlier than later. On February the 13th, the White House announced that the largest and newest American aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, was on its way to the Iranian theater. It's going to take them about a week to arrive there, and during that time, I'm sure that all of the pilots will be undergoing their briefings and getting their specific targeting information, so that they will be ready to launch. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln is already on station, along with a large flotilla of various ships that are capable of launching missiles and offensive missiles, and also ships that are capable of shooting down Iranian missiles that may target the fleet. I wouldn't be surprised if we've got some nuclear submarines. There has been no mention at all of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we did not have those on station by this time, ready to launch cruise missiles. Now, one of the interesting things, I have followed very closely the wars in Libya and then in Syria, and I'm very conscious of the way that we deal with terror groups like ISIS. And towards the end of the later in the Syrian conflict, the United States, after sort of taking a hands-off approach to ISIS in order to allow them to help to overthrow the Syrian government, we turned on them. I think there was a lot of public outrage against them crucifying and burning people alive and this kind of thing, and they just became politically inconvenient. All this, for years, we had known exactly where the capital of the Islamic Caliphate was, and then when the time came, we turned on them with a vengeance, and we bombed their capital of Raqqa, which was kind of an isolated, in sort of a desert location. And after some days of bombing, the ISIS just disintegrated, and they fled into the desert by car, by bus, by truck, whatever they could get their hands on. And there were literally miles and miles of ISIS soldiers and members of their family fleeing. Now, if we had been serious about destroying the menace of terror that was supposedly at the heart of the war on terror, we would have killed everybody who was out in those deserts. They were totally vulnerable. You could go in, you could strafe, you could bomb, you could do anything that you wanted. They were absolutely helpless, and there were thousands and thousands of them. But we didn't. And it was very interesting. I was watching this like a hawk because I know that we have a long history of using terror armies as an offensive weapon. Mm-hmm. And it was very interesting what we did, because we, instead of killing them off, we killed very few. And what we did is we captured the whole bunch of them, and then we put them in detention camps in northern Syria, where we have fed them and housed them at the U.S. taxpayer expense for years. And their families are growing up. They're having more children, more sons, and they're training them in this same fundamentalist, hate-filled ideology that says that anybody who is not a radical, primitive Sunni individual, everybody else should be beheaded, especially Christians, especially Kurds, Druze, Alawites, all of those who are viewed as less appropriate people. So we have maintained these. Now, why did we do this? Why, these are people vastly worse than anything that we could ever imagine with the Nazis. And yet there were no trials, there were no executions, there were nothing. We just kept them. Well, it's my opinion that we have kept them for two contingencies, one being for a potential conflict with China, which has the Uyghurs, who tend to be very, very unstable in one corner of China. And we wanted the ability to surge radical Muslim fundamentalists into that part of China to destabilize it in case of a war with China. Mm-hmm. The other thing was for potential use against Iran. Now, this is, you won't even find anybody discussing this except for me. So I want to point out, this is not some widely held consensus, but this is from somebody who has been on the ground, who has been on the front lines, some of the biggest battles that took place in the war, somebody who knew the president of Syria, who met with the majority of the entire parliament, the religious leaders, and this kind of thing. So I view the movement of ISIS as very suspicious. Now also, there was a report that a U.S. missile destroyer ship was docked at an Israeli port, indicating that the U.S. Navy is now positioning itself to assist in the defense of Israel against missiles fired in retaliation for a surprise attack. Finally, the U.S. Southern Command operates out of Qatar, which is, I've been in Qatar, I've driven and so forth, and Qatar is basically an enormous sand dune of just, no vegetation whatsoever, and it has a great deal of gas wealth. But it also has about 10,000 U.S. troops who orchestrate all of the wars that we fight in the Middle East. Recently, we have shifted from having the anti-aircraft missiles at Al Udeid in Qatar. They had previously been fixed missiles, and we have transitioned to where we've gone to mobile truck-mounted missiles so that they can be constantly moving and shifting around, making them much more difficult targets. All this suggests that this is way beyond sort of a bluff and a show of strength. And I hope I'm wrong. I know Colonel Douglas McGregor, the friend of mine. He is certainly of the opinion that the decision has been made, and I believe it has. I think these rapid fire meetings with Netanyahu, I think this latest one was just finalizing the last details of and think about it. we think back to Pearl Harbor as this egregious, horrible thing done to the United States. We are about to launch Pearl Harbor against Iran, and we will probably do it in the midst of peace negotiations, just like we did the last time.
Yeah, it's very important that you noted that Netanyahu did just visit the U.S. The president, I think this is the most visits he's visited any president in history, just this in this single year and a half alone, or not a year, just a little over a year of this administration. And another thing to note is there's a lot more similarities to the invasion or the capture, kidnapping, however you would like to refer to, of Maduro. You have a naval fleet that was on the coast of Venezuela, strangling them, capturing their oil tankers that were not hoisting the right flags of the country they represented. All in that sense of kind of, or the drone strikes on the small dinghy boats. And then we have this Tuesday, like I had told you before we went on, that there is going to be this peace talk in Geneva with characters like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. These both are representatives of this new entity called the Board of Peace that the Trump administration is kind of making to break away. It appears to break away from the UN. I think these are all very important things to note because through what we've seen through other engagements, like the engagements that we've taken with Ukraine and Russia, or the past engagements that we took with Iran, is that there's this guise, oh, we're in peace talks, and then there's this, retaliatory strike to try and get them to further escalate tensions. So that might be something that we're seeing here. You said it takes a week for the ship to end up on the coast or in the Mediterranean. This thing takes place on Tuesday. That might kind of set the precedent for the media to say, oh, we've tried our avenues of peace and we can't have that. So we got to, crank up it a notch and kind of get a bit more violent. So I think those are important things to watch out for. Do you have any other comments, Senator?
Yeah, I would just say, I think the peace negotiations are a total farce. I don't think it matters what agreement Iran might make. I think it's the objective of Israel to destroy the nation of Iran. And they're going to do it, and we're expected to carry it out for them. I would predict that this is not going to be anything like Venezuela, where the Trump administration, it was a combination of luck and some smart thinking and so forth. Trump was able to say, you know what, we kind of got what we want here. Let's stop pushing the envelope. He's not going to have that option with Israel. Israel is calling the shots. The people who will fund the midterm elections, very, very wealthy pro-Israel people, will not accept that. That will not be an acceptable solution. The objective is to destroy Iran, and I would predict that we will kill 3 million people before this war is over. Mm-hmm. And it will not be a quick and easy thing. It will involve just waves and waves of violence, repeated violence. I hope I'm wrong. I hope our listeners can say, you were so far off base with this, but I've got a lot of history. And a lot of it is very, very close examination as these things were taking place.
Yeah, 100%. I think, we had spoken about this before, probably numerous times. There's this strategic maneuvering of really who we are trying to inflict damage upon or send messages to are kind of the other two rivaling superpowers, Russia and China. And, you had that with Venezuela, which they were, in alliance with China and Russia. But then I think you move up the chess piece with a character like Iran, that actually has a lot of these strategic partnerships with Russia, with China. I believe prior to the some of these protests that we have seen that later turned into riots, you had a lot of weapon shipments coming from Russia into Iran's airspace. So you do see a lot of these players ending up on the scene again and again. I think we see that as well with Cuba, where the Russia was the one sending oil to Cuba. They're continuing to do so, and I think they're calling out America's uh, blockade that they're trying to enact. So I think that is also important to note that there, if you broaden the scope a little bit, that you have these players that if we were to get into a direct engagement with, that is a world war, a nuclear war. So, it's something that is easily avoidable, but it is something that our leaders are constantly poking bear at, and it is completely unacceptable and irresponsible. Um,
This is true. And you make a good point. Both Russia and China have vital national interest in Iran, which the things going on in Latin America are important to them, and they really wish that things would go better, but they're not prepared to take any risks for Latin America. Like it or not, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, and certainly Trump has breathed new life into it. But when you get to Iran, this is on the other side of the world. This is not our next door neighbor, and but it's something where Iranian oil is absolutely crucial to China, and the trade relationship between Iran and Russia is very vital to them. And so I think you're going to see Russia and China, at a minimum, uh, helping out with arms and equipment, with missile technology and so forth. And I think the way that Russia does it, and I can't swear that isn't a little different in Iran, but typically when Russia sells weapons to another country, they also have the technology experts, the Russian technology experts, who actually provide advice and direction on the scene. So it wouldn't be surprising if there were uh, Russian technology people helping with the missile launches and that type of thing. And
Yeah, I mean,
I
the U.S. kind of was doing that as well with the attack of missiles. So it's not, so far the scope of, um, reality that happens often with a lot of these proxy wars. And I think that's kind of what we're viewing is this different forms, different countries are really kind of, it's at the heart of it is that you have the Western countries trying to get back at some of the other, the, um, the other superpowers, China and Russia. Now, with that, I would like to offer you any final comments on the foreign policy part before we switch to our domestic portion of what we would like to discuss today.
I think we can move on and uh, start our next topic.
Okay. I know that what we've seen a lot. Um, pardon me, why is it not coming on the stage? Let's see. Is these ICE demonstrations. You have them getting more provocative. I believe, in my opinion, of course, you can inject with yours. It's going on both sides. There's this kind of saber rattling on both sides that's not kind of quelling tensions and maybe making things calmer in some of these cities to the point where they might break out in some riots. So I know that you have said that, throughout this historical lens, you can look at some of the destruction that some demonstrations that turn into riots have done in the name of trying to seek reform within their government.
Yeah, one of the great tragedies of United States politics is that uh, in many ways the great contest between the two parties is driven by the constant promotion of racial animosity. This has been going on for certainly my lifetime, and one of the things that we have these periodic upheavals in the cities, so particularly the Democrat governed cities. And the reason that I chose this topic for today was a very small article that was let's see, it was trying to see who actually did this, but
Here, I have it on the screen. It's Cipher, Cutting Through the Noise.
yes. But they did very small but very eye-opening article, and they reported that in Portland, which has been an epicenter of urban upheaval recently, just in a 6-year period, Portland downtown, the core, the economic heart of the city, has lost 70% of its value. And when I saw that, it was just such a stunning collapse of the value. I want to tell you, I was on the West Coast. I was with Fort Ord and 7th Infantry Division out of the Monterey Peninsula, and in fact, my son still lives out there today. And I was the staff judge advocate, so I was in charge of a large legal office there. And so I would travel back and forth, and then later I was moved to what we call in the Army JAG Corps, they call it I Corps, which is Roman numeral 1. It's the Corps at Fort Lewis, Washington. And at Fort Lewis, I had 70 JAG attorneys, and we had people who were dual-hatted as United States attorneys, and we were in federal court doing litigation, all this stuff. Well, anyway, so I would be traveling back and forth along the coast, and my wife and I sometimes would drive by Portland, and it was sort of known as a liberal gem, where there seemed to be some interest for corporations to do business there and this sort of thing. And now this was back in around sort of between 1987 and 1992, and so that was sort of the atmosphere. Oh, they're sort of this up and coming, a liberal place, but it wasn't viewed at that time as being what it is today. And but it was very prosperous at the time, and kind of you had all these computer people who thought it was a neat place to go and that kind of thing. Well, anyway, there is nothing neat about Portland today, and what happened is that it was just exposed to long periods of upheaval, unrest, and lawlessness. And it's interesting that actually the radical history of Portland goes back to the 1800s, where there was some firebrand anarchist newspaper that was distributed. So it goes way, way back. But I think the really key periods of time were the most recent ones. And you had a period of riots following the death of George Floyd, and this was in around 2020, and in Portland, you had 50 nights of violence where anarchists targeted the federal buildings, which was no accident because there was, there was the presidential elections, that kind of thing. And so they wanted to sort of have that stick in the eye to the administration, and so they attacked the federal buildings to sort of make first President Trump look sort of powerless and inept. And President Trump finally he gave a federal designation that Portland was an anarchist jurisdiction, and that's what he had declared. And then I think in large part because of the George Floyd racial uprising, Joe Biden made the presidency. I don't think he did it legitimately, but he did it one way or the other, whether you think it was legitimate or not. And Joe Biden, the day after he took office, he signed an executive order, and he lifted the designation of Portland as an anarchist jurisdiction. And but that didn't stop Portland from just being an out of control location. So you had this enormous explosion of drug use, open drug use, homelessness. Federal authority, well, not just federal, but local authorities also just gave up control of portions of the city. And so you had this. Now, Heritage Foundation they published an article in 2021. So this is, shortly after Biden became president, and it was called "Anarchy Reigns in Portland," and it had a subtitle that said, "Portland has quickly become one of the most violent cities in America," and it said that Portland saw the largest increase in homicides in the country, and they say this is especially impressive when you think that there has been a nationwide spike in homicides, which was brought about by this collapse of law and order across the nation during this period of lawlessness. And by this time, of course, Joe Biden was in office, and so you had Democrat politicians sort of trying to restore some law and order that they had been trying to work against before. But as the Heritage Foundation pointed out, that once you have this atmosphere of unconstrained violence, the bleeding is hard to stop. And they said ordered liberty once lost is difficult to restore. That's certainly true. You had George Soros, who was funding all of these district attorneys, so that the Democrats were able to capture the prosecution function and put in hard left radicals as the prosecutors. And of course, the prosecutors hated the ordinary public, and so what would happen is the police would go out, they would arrest people involved in these riots and protests, and then the charges would be immediately thrown out, and this went on and on. So The city of Portland actually was besieged with protests for 200 straight days after the death of George Floyd. And the Heritage was pointing out that Portland was a microcosm of the blue city model. And that was where, in all these Democrat cities, you had high crime, lawless activists operating with impunity, rampant homelessness, drug use, and a depressed business climate that sort of started this downhill roll where you'd have businesses, you'd have stores that could service these minority communities, and the stores would be burned out. The the jobs that were available to people who lived in those communities were erased. You couldn't get a drugstore to open, so it made it very hard for the people living in those communities to continue. So it is a cycle that we're on again with the ICE protests, um, and the politicians in these areas have every incentive in the world to promote as much unrest and as much disorder as they can. And I think this will continue through the midterm elections at some level, whatever level they can promote. It's just a sad thing about American politics that that urban violence dovetails with the federal election cycle, and there are there are people who benefit from it, the people who are on the receiving end of it politically. I'm talking about. Um, then I just mentioned the Chicago Tribune did an article back in 2022, and their article was entitled "Something Grows in the Big Cities Run by Democrats: An Overwhelming Sense of Lawlessness." And this was sort of at the height of all of this. Biden was the president. He was very much on the side of the more criminal elements, and as they were pointing out that there's murder, gang shootings that were out of control. Once vibrant downtown areas were on their way to becoming ghost towns, and they singled out George Soros, who spent enormous sums of money helping to elect these radical prosecutors, and sort of with the I don't know that there was a deal. I think it was just he got people who were inclined to do this to just release people. They didn't believe in bond. They So they would arrest people, just let them walk out, and then dismiss the charges against them. And the Chicago Tribune said that the left-wing prosecutors would not anger their base when they released violent offenders back into poor neighborhoods to commit more violent acts on poor people. That the left is their base. This is what they want, what Soros paid for. And so we went.
Looks like we just have some technical difficulties. Just lost the senator. we had some technical difficulties. I got the senator back on. Sorry about that. It happens.
Yeah, okay, well, we apologize for that break. But just to finish, the Chicago Tribune, they were talking in there about how, of course, this is hurting these minority communities because the worst of the criminals are being released back into the communities. And in any event, they said that you can see that something is growing in the big cities, an overwhelming sense of lawlessness. And we're starting to see that again. This is the latest cycle of it. And you can see, even though ICE has now withdrawn completely from Minneapolis and just left it to the Somali fraudsters and whatever's left there. The governor, Tim Walz, is still, blasting and trying to rally the radical troops all across America. So it's a sad thing, and it's unfortunate because it is so enormously destructive for the minority communities. This unending series of violent episodes that they're not organic. It's not that some of them aren't to some extent, but they're very programmed, and you'll notice some correspondence to the presidential cycles and the midterm elections and that type of thing.
Yeah, there is a pattern, and you'd be kind of ignorant to dismiss that. And I think that in my personal opinion, there is this larger game that's being played. What we saw through the events that happened in 2020 through the George Floyd protests that progressed to riots. You had far more police budgets being expanded. These more militarized presence of police, and I think that's kind of what you get in the sense of these demonstrations. I think it was the National Defense Authorization Act of 1994 that first allowed military equipment to be injected in local police forces. I say this to say because I think it snowballs this effect where you have the public being met with this detached form of civil peacekeeping, where you see this kind of militarized presence, and it feeds into this this violent snowball of tit for tat. We violently arrest some of your men or your women, or and then there's more lash out that happens, as opposed to kind of what I believe a peace officer is supposed to do is kind of maintain the peace, be a member of the community. And there definitely are very good police members who very engaged in the community, are able to have these conversations with the people that their children go to school with, and they can keep the peace that way. And I think when you see the progression with what you saw with Minneapolis and the ICE engagement that happened there, was this palpable detachment between the ICE agents who are being injected into a community that the community was voicing their opposition to, regardless of who, if you think it's just or not, they voiced their opposition. And then things progressed and they got more violent, more agitated. And so that's kind of what my take on this is that I, for one, don't want to release any of my constitutional rights to my government in terms of seeking liberty or seeking safety. I think we see that sometimes when we have these events where they are very violent and riots. We're saying, okay, well, now we got to give this precinct a tank to then deal with the the next riot. And granted, there's all these nuances that you could take into the conversation. Like, sure, yes, there should be gas masks and different gear, but I think when there's just this snowball effect that's happening. I think we had spoken about it off air as this kind of this move to more surveillance that's happening with The ICE agents, they're supposed to be immigration enforcement. They have this separate operation that was leaked from an ICE agent whistleblower, that there are making databases on American citizens that they find to be volatile. They're labeling them as domestic terrorists. And that term is very heavy ever since 9/11. You don't have the right to habeas corpus. You don't have your constitutional rights. And I feel like that is very, very scary if we allow that to happen. If you cheered on in this sense, it might be used by another administration against you. That's kind of my whole thing, is you don't know who's going to have the next battering ram, or stick to wield the laws against you. And so if we keep kind of chipping away at our rights, you don't know if it's going to be used against you. I think we'd spoken about the different events in Waco with the church that was then. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
The branch.
Is just this progression of what we're seeing is state infringement in different forms. So that's kind of my whole take on it, is that the snowball effect, where you have a community that are voicing their opposition, it's not being heard, then they get more loud, and there's other agitation that comes to it, and it comes to this boiling point where you see very violent, unacceptable actions being taken in direct cities. It doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, I know during the George Floyd era, one of the things that upset many people was that someone who obviously had plenty of money was funding all of this. I think the same thing is happening today. But back then, what they did is they would deliver pallets of bricks, and they would stage those along the route of protest, so that people could just pick up the bricks, break them in half, and then they could kill police officers.
Mm-hmm. That was a big thing. No one knew where they came from, kind of thing.
And they mentioned, I think they mentioned in Portland, where they did something a little ingenious, where the weather was very cold, and so they had pallets of bottled water, and they would just leave them out to freeze overnight, to where they were just sort of like a big rock, and then they handed them out to the crowd to throw and to hit the federal agents in Portland, who were, and I think they mentioned this with, they were defending a statue of Christopher Columbus, and the whole push of the left is to destroy all record of Western civilization and just sort of wipe it away. And we could get into Christopher Columbus, but in any event, whether you've come out on one side of something or the other, there's merit to preserving history. I know during the George Floyd thing, in addition to ripping down all sorts of statues, anybody who had a Confederate relationship or something, they ripped all those down. But then there was a place that had been a slave market in one of the towns, and the rioters went in and they tore down the slave market. They just destroyed it. Well, you would think that the left would want to preserve that. I mean, because they want to promote the idea that things were very unfair. But there's just sort of this anarchistic idea. Well, let's just erase everything and destroy everything, and then we'll write history in our own mold. But in any event, it's a difficult thing, and we're going through it. As you mentioned, it forces the police authorities to, they wear masks. ICE does, and people say, "Well, this is outrageous." Well, if you look, the the ICE officers and the supervisors are being doxxed and hounded, and literally they're in danger of their own lives once they're identified. And so things that seem unusual, like masks for officers, um, are things that are forced upon them by the type of environment that they're thrust into. So it's unfortunate. It's a terrible cycle, and how we ever break it, I don't know. I suspect that someday, if somebody were able to write an objective history of the United States and to explain why we eventually disintegrated, that will probably that would be one of the chapters for them to write. That it was this unfortunate situation where you had political advantage uh, to be gained by the violence, and it just was this endless cycle. And every time the violence erupts, then the people who are angry because their communities are not as nice as other communities, their communities end up burned out, destroyed, vandalized, and crime is allowed to run rampant. And then you just have this cycle. Well, how come our community is not as good as the next one? How
Yeah.
come how come Walmart won't build a building here? Well, it's because you burned it down, you looted, and so forth. But it's just a sad history, and uh, hopefully we'll have some better leadership that can break the cycle. But it's something we sort of have to deal with. It's sort of like a terminal disease that you try to moderate. You try to take medication to do away with some of the symptoms, but you can lengthen your life, but you can't go on forever doing that.
Yeah, I know that we are at a time today, but I did wanted to I know on this show we really like to broaden the scope of things as well, and I think that one important thing to note is, the American economy is in tethers right now. In tethers right now, we have over $30 trillion in debt, and I think a lot of the issues that we see, they generate right around election time. I think that's all on purpose because it just serves to divide us Americans and kind of uh, neglect to see what kind of keeps us together and unified. So that's what I would like to kind of leave us off with, is that we are American citizens, we are neighbors, and not be fooled into thinking of why we need to be divided, because there is a lot of issues within our country, given like our economy, our infrastructure, all of that. I think that plays a part where our media really exploits some of our differences and makes them bigger than they actually are. So
Well,
with
Morgan,
that,
thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption in the middle of the show, but thank you for sticking with us here.
yes, yes, of course, it's always a pleasure, Senator, and I will encourage everyone to tune in next week to focus on the news.
Thank you.